Yeah, we're now going to kick off with our identifying funding options for medtech. So thank you everybody for coming over here. Delighted to be joined by some fantastic experts who do this every single day, supporting companies of all sizes. So I'm just going to start by introducing everybody. So Michael, do you want to give a bit of background and introduction to you and your work?
Am I going for Michael and you're going for Mike?
Right. Oh, Michael Kipping, sorry.
Sorry, is this repartee? So yeah, lovely to meet you all. I'm Michael Kipping. I work for Innovate UK. I'm one of the health innovation leads and run one of the funding programs that we have called the Biomedical Catalyst that specifically focus on providing grant funding support for UK health and life sciences businesses.
Over to Mike.
Chris, I'll pick this one up. Okay, my name is Mike Lewis. I'm Professor of Life Science Innovation at the University of Birmingham, and that's one of my day jobs. And then the other day jobs, I work as Program Director for the I4I program at NIHR, National Institute of Health Research, and also look after the Sbri healthcare programs as well for NHS England.
Excellent. And Joe?
Thanks, Costa. Yeah, I'm Joe Slater-Newton. I'm an early stage deep tech venture capitalist with IQ Capital, so investing at seed and Series A and technology companies. Have a technical background and in a previous life helped to run a technology company which was supported by Innovate UK and others.
Excellent. And last but not least, Andrew.
Thanks, Costa. So my name's Andrew. I work for Seeders, a crowdfunding platform here in the UK. We're looking for companies that are looking to top up their investment rounds and not just benefit from sort of additional capital, but also to be able to market their product or service.
Excellent. I think we've just lost your video, but I know you're still here. So the purpose of today's session is to support medtech SMEs to identify the right funding to support their long-term sustainability. And the way that we're going to approach this is really three areas. One, selecting the right funding. Two, once you've selected what's right for you, finding that funding and getting to it. And three, preparation to help you secure it. So I'm going to go over to Joe first. In your opinion, who do you think is actually right for equity investment, and who's it wrong for when raising from seed to Series A or B?
So equity investment certainly isn't right for every business. It needs to be businesses that have the ability to scale hugely. So for example, consultancy businesses which can sort of only scale on the level of the individual consultants. They can't sort of rapidly scale. That's not going to be appropriate for that kind of funding. And it's also not the first point of call if you can get money from your clients already. If you can start selling something immediately, it's not going to be appropriate. But if there's work that you have to do to build your product or develop it or put money into expanding, and you can't sort of fund that directly from your clients, then it's worth sort of partnering with a venture capital fund who will buy some of your shares and give you the injection of cash to help you scale, develop the product, do all of that kind of thing. But it needs to you need to be going after a really big market.
Absolutely, and it's definitely right for some people and not right for others. And I'd say the same is right for crowdfunding as well, Andrew. Because it is a marketing campaign that people have to run as well as fundraising. So what's your opinion on the same question, really?
Yeah, couldn't agree more with Joe. I guess debt is in the long run cheaper than equity if you're a company which can sustain itself without taking on equity. That's obviously everyone's that's the best option for those founders. But that being said, equity is a fantastic way to take on those on a board to be able to have a say or at least a guidance in the direction of a company. But then I guess moving into the space of crowdfunding, traditionally it's a space where you have a silent investor that's able to sort of top up that amount in which you've been able to raise. You're able to then push it out to the crowd, those retail investors, those to be able to traditionally invest into the B2C kinds of businesses, but we're definitely seeing a trend now into more B2B sustainability tech, but also med tech and health tech. So it's a space that obviously does have a lot of emotion attached to an investment, but as long as that emotion is tied into justification, or at least sort of answers or questions that do guide the direction of the investor, it's a space that allows to be able to seamlessly tie into VC investment and angel investment.
And there's a lot of preparation that goes into crowdfunding. You don't just go live straight away, do you?
No, you don't. So usually the entire process is 2.5 to 3 months. That's from the moment in which we start preparing the campaign, working with terms and pre-committed capital, tapping into those users in the community or the network in which the founder has, and then moving through to the fundraise and then closing off the round. So it is a rather rigid sort of time frame. However, it does take a lot of effort, and it is a fundraise in itself, absolutely.
And so we've talked now briefly about the equity investment side. Sometimes founders think to themselves, I don't want to give away equity. I need something to start me up or to help me to scale without giving away my pot of gold. And they look to grants. And I know Michael and Michael, or Mike, work in this area quite a lot. And what are your opinions on that? Who do you think is right for grant funding? And who isn't?
I'll go as Mike first because I got the shorter name, you see, than Michael. I think what's grant funding right for? It's right for people who want to de-risk a little bit, and as you say, not give away the family silver or the gold, because the most expensive equity you give away is probably the first bit of equity, because you're actually giving a little bit away of your baby, your project. So it's great for de-risking. And Mike will probably cover biomedical catalysts, but at NIHR we run 2 programs. One is I4I, and that's open to higher education, it's open to SMEs, it's open to caregivers as well, NHS institutions. And that's where you're at the stage of trying to go from a proof of concept, and you're trying to go through to some sort of validation or get your commercial ducks in a row. So that's one side. The other side is the Sbri funding, but that's thematic. So you have to be careful when you pick your grant funding, because some grant funding is thematic. It's based around things like, say, current Sbri challenges are around stroke rehabilitation, net zero. And then you've got other programs as well, which are more open. But the thing you always have to consider with grant funding is grant funding takes a little bit of time. Andrew mentioned crowdfunding, 2.5, 3 months. With grant funding, you're going through a cycle which can be 6, 8, 9 months in cases. So it's something you need to consider very early. And you need to start things very quickly as well. The good news about grant funding, certainly on the I4I and Sbri side, it's 100% funding, and you get quarterly payments, so you get stage payments so you can plan properly. And we've probably done around about, between Sbri and I4I, we've probably done somewhere in about 750 projects in total and invested about $500 million. We get about a 3 times leverage on that for the hardworking taxpayers' funds.
Wow. I mean, it is a lot of work that goes into it, much like setting up a crowdfunding campaign and having all the right documentation that you need, like when you're submitting a tender, for example. Yeah. There is a lot that goes into it. And you'll probably agree that some grants are right for some people and some are. So that though somebody is right for grant funding generally, they might not be right for certain grants. So we tend to work with some grant writers, and they always like to assess whether they think there is a high likelihood of them having a chance. And even
when we get around to tips and tricks and things we learned, we'll probably talk about grant writers as a class anyway.
Absolutely. And Michael, what are your thoughts? Who is it right and wrong for?
Yeah, so I mean, I firstly agree with what Mike said. I think just to think about it slightly differently, certainly from an Innovate UK perspective, our role in the funding landscape is really at that very early stage to try and help businesses de-risk their commercial R&D. We cannot and should not compete with Jo and her team, investors, angels. That's not our role to intervene in a market. We're really there to try and address a specific unmet need, very early stage, right, sort of pre-seed stage, where businesses tend to struggle to get cash. But on the good side, the funding's non-dilutive, so we don't take any interest in your business, any equity. There's no clawback, and unless you commit fraud, and then but generally no clawback. You get monitoring officers, and there's also a piece there around the sort of the non-financial benefit as well of getting an NIHR grant for an Innovate UK grant, because that could be looked on favourably by future investors as well, because they may look upon the fact that you've had funding from us as in some respects an element of de-risking on their behalf as well, because it's been through sort of a bit of due diligence from us. But on the flip side, really competitive. Success rates between 5 and 10%, depending on the program. A lot of projects I've seen recently through Biomedical Catalyst scored really well, scored brilliantly, but we just don't have enough money to fund them. And Mike's already mentioned the timeline. So yes, it's great if you can get it, but don't bank on getting it. If you get it, it's a bonus basically, and sort of plan ahead. So try and look at a range of ways to get that cash you need to do your commercial R&D.
You've raised some interesting points there, and going on to my next question really is that we always like to promote a blended finance approach for companies. Sometimes mixing different funding. We often get, at least at the seed stage, we might get a startup come to us and say, okay, we're raising 500k. We want to put 200 grand on seeders. We want to put 200 grand through angels, and we're looking to try and secure one or a few grants. How do you perceive that, Jo? That mix of funding? Do you look upon it favourably? Are there any downsides? Let's say if loans are involved, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all a rich ecosystem, and all parts need to work together. So we probably rarely invest in a business that hasn't had, for example, angel funding and grant funding. Actually, a lot of ours do have grant funding. And I think there's definite advantages of both. Sort of, angels might bring expertise and advice, as well as the cash. Obviously, the non-dilutive element of the grant funding is great. I think in terms of downsides, when it comes to crowdfunding, you want to think about whether the platform helps sort of corral your underlying investors into a nominee and make it sort of simple administratively. That can really help you. And also to think about valuation. So it has been known that the occasional crowdfunding project has gone on there for an incredibly high valuation that professional investors wouldn't have gone for, but the crowd sort of did go for. And from one point of view, you might think that's great for the founder. You get a really good price, but actually, if it's not a realistic price, it can sort of damage your chances of getting funding at the next round. Similarly with grant funding, it's really important that you don't get distracted. So sometimes there's particular grant calls that might be closely aligned to what you're doing or what you want to do, but not exactly what you want to do. And if you start sort of weaving and ducking and try to sort of change what you're doing so that you fit into those calls, or you get carried away doing too many side projects and get them grant funded, then it can really dilute your effort. So if the grant funded project is completely aligned to the core path, what you really need to do, then it's an excellent thing to have.
I totally agree with that. Having been involved in some non-profit organisations, getting grant funding, always looking at were we achieving our mission by taking that on, and at times rejecting certain funding when it wasn't right. Andrew, what are your thoughts on Jo's point about inflated valuations affecting companies at the next round?
Yeah, I guess valuation is one of three reasons for why companies fail on the platform. And we do everything in our capacity through vetting, through understanding due diligence, through understanding terms that have already been set from a lead investor to ensure that when the company does list on the platform, that valuation is as realistic as possible. And this is sort of an example of why collaboration for a crowdfund is so important. We look to make sure that these terms that are set are from a reputable investor that do know what they're doing. They know the business the best out of anyone, because as we know, crowdfunding, yes, you get investors that require documentation, pitch decks, articles. However, you do have that retail investor who may look at a campaign for 6 minutes, make an ultimate decision to invest a small amount of money. At the end of the day, they are KYC'd, AML'd, they register as whether they're high net worth, sophisticated, or retail. I guess the analogy that I like to bring up in these circumstances is if you and I were to go down to the TAB and place money on a horse, there's no regulation there. What's to stop them from doing or spending £10 on a horse than it is to invest into a startup? I think there's so many more safety measures implemented in investment into startups to be able to build investors' portfolios. I mean, you have cryptocurrency, you have NFTs, you have all of these different ways in which people are now leveraging not just the traditional method of publicly listed companies. It's adding a lot of value to be able to expand their horizons. And yeah, that's my perspective on that.
Does anybody want to add to anything to what Andrew's saying? No? Okay. So once companies have said, okay, I think I've selected the right funding mix or blend for me, how do they go about getting to it? So what is the best way, Joe, for example, to approach you or another VC firm? Can you share any tips that would want to make you keep reading a pitch deck or hear them out, etc.? Because you probably get such a high volume.
Yeah, absolutely. We do get a lot of pitch decks across our desks. So I think in terms of preparing to reach out to investors, it's definitely the first step is to work out who's going to be the best fit to you. You know, don't waste your time and their time reaching out to investors that don't invest in your sector, your stage. So do a bit of homework on that. Talk to companies that have been invested by the investors. Work out who you think is going to be good to work with, and then I guess just clarity of storytelling. So we do see, you know, a lot of decks. A lot of people say you really have to try and get a warm introduction, somebody to introduce you personally to the investor. And I think we certainly try and democratize it so that that's not necessary. But if you think about what happens when you get a personal introduction, you often get somebody that just sort of gives a really clear summary and gives a little bit of validation to that company. So try and get that another way by just making a really clear sort of summary. You know, tell the story of what you're trying to do, and bring along as much validation as you can from customers, potential customers, partners, that sort of thing. Yeah, just if you're sending materials, just, you know, think about the person that's reading them is probably rushing through. Make sure that, you know, the headings stick out. There's a good summary at the beginning. Stick to the big picture. What are you doing? Why should we care? And who are you?
And that's very important because of the volume. You also have your own KPIs. You know where the gaps in your pipeline or your deal flow of what you are seeing or not seeing, and you want to know straight away. You don't want to miss that hidden gem that could be a big winner for you. So yeah, that conciseness and the right materials is very key. Same question to Andrew. I mean, we introduce a lot of companies into seeders. We usually do so when they meet certain criteria. Maybe they've got certain amounts of commitment already. They've got a crowd that they can promote to, etc. What are factors that you look for, and B, what's the best way to launch a crowdfunding campaign? Is it to just go onto seedrs.com, or is it best to come through a member of your team?
Absolutely, Costa. So timing is absolutely crucial for a crowdfund. So first off, I'll touch on the things in which we look for in a company prior to a possible crowdfund. Look into sort of the companies that may not be suitable for a crowdfund, and then talk you through the methods of how to approach it. So first off, we have pre-committed capital. So as I said, crowdfunding is a place to be able to consolidate all investment into one place. Makes it seamless for the company, clean cap table for the investor, a way to be able to reap economic benefits through the nominee structure. It's a way for those that invest to be able to use Seedrs as a platform to be able to build a portfolio of their companies in one place. So coming back to the company, they need to be in a stage in which is ripe for the investment in which they're looking for. So a company that is pre-Series A, looking to raise around about less than $1 million. That's the prime position to be able to appeal to our investors. We do take on investment from companies that are raising 100K up to 7.5. And these companies would ideally then have sort of a community, a user network, a network that the founder is able to sort of leverage and bring across to the platform to build the momentum with that pre-committed capital, so that when it hits the investors that are on the Seedrs platform, they're reassured that those that know the business the best, they're the ones that are going to be putting them in good stead to be able to use the funds and the milestones that the company wishes to achieve. I guess it then ties into what is a company that may not be suitable for crowdfunding, and I guess it may be companies that may have a complicated business model. Those companies that take some time to be able to really digest, because again, our assumption is that these pre-committed investors, the network really does know that business, and it needs to be quite sort of comprehensive or compelling for these investors. We then want to have a look for companies that we may not want to take on companies that are not wanting to benefit from marketing. As we know, crowdfunding is a crucial element to the crowdfund. We want to be able to make sure that these companies are understanding of the time frames that they're taken on, say 2.5 to 3 months for this investment to land in their account. So that needs to be a consideration as well. So for companies that are willing to or wanting to be able to sort of look into the opportunity of crowdfunding, absolutely willing to be able to chat with you about it. But simply send me an email or just jump onto the Seedrs platform. There's a suitability form there, of which you'd then be able to get in touch with our BDA team, and they'd be able to sort of dissect whether it is an option. Otherwise, chat with me directly.
Fantastic. That's such a comprehensive insight into that process. And I think we've lost Michael, but he is trying to get back in. So I'll go over to Mike. Similar question, really, once companies decide to go for grant funding, what's the best way really to approach it? And also, you touched on, grant writers being in a class of their own. Should companies go to grant writers to help them secure funding, or should they do it themselves, or work even in a consortium with more experienced partners like universities?
Well, I ran the AI and machine learning model over the people who use grant writers to send in grants, and they usually get better past the first hurdle. But then if there's any interview stage or whatever involved, then they usually fall over that interview stage. I like to see applications coming in for grants written in plain language and simple language. People like grant writers tend to end up with word soup or hyperbolisms and all sorts of things. And describing two men working in a shed as being world leading, I mean, it just turns you off instantly, and you walk away from that sort of thing. How do you look for grant funding? First of all, you've got to go, there's a couple of places, and Michael would tell you that Innovate have a great site where you can look at all the Innovate funding in one page. you've got to find out whether there's suitable grants available for you. So you've got to go onto the NIHR website, nihr.ac.uk, or you go onto the NHS England SBRI healthcare website and just have a look through and see what is available before you make your mind up. I think Joe said you can spend a lot of time writing grant applications. It's the same amount of work to do that as it is to get an application to work with a seed capital organization. So you've got to be selective as well and pick carefully what you're going to do. I think the other question is, how do you get successful? How are you successful? I think a couple of things that we look for. I think you've got to look for a real unmet need. People who can address some really unmet need out there in the healthcare. And we got lots of unmet needs out there, 5.6 million people on the waiting list, etc. We've got some big needs out there. That's the first thing. Does it touch one of those big needs? Secondly, does it have impact on people, on their lives, on their families, on their carers? Does it allow them to go to work? Does it influence capacity in the healthcare system as well? If you can tick those two boxes, your application is going to be read and your chance of getting through is probably a lot higher than if you don't tick those boxes as well. Last tip, never ignore EDI. Never forget, at the end of the day, there's not a patient, there's a citizen at the end of the innovation, and you have to involve them, include them, and make sure that you don't bring your own biases into the application as well. And you make sure that you include, you're diverse, you're inclusive, and you're equal. So many applications come for grants from the Golden Triangle, Oxford, Cambridge, London, and there's a real drive to get grants and applications from outside that, because the healthcare need is higher, if not equal, outside the Golden Triangle. So really encourage people from outside that Golden Triangle to apply.
I think that was very useful to understand, at least for people that are trying to decide if to go through the grant writing option or not. And Michael, you've dropped out of. You've said you've had a power cut. So thankfully you're back, so you might not have heard the question. So the question really is about, once the company's decided to go for grant funding, what's the best way to go about doing it? Do they bring in a grant writer? Do they go at it alone? Do they go for a consortium? We tend to connect a lot of startups and scale-ups with universities around some research interests, so that they can do a joint Innovate UK bid sometimes. What's your opinion on this, and any tips as well?
So can you hear me okay, firstly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
That's a start. So in terms of grant writers, firstly, we try and, picking up on Joe's point about equity of opportunity, we try and we're trying to evolve our competitions to make them less reliant on the need for grant writers, and we hold panels that Mike's involved with that see lots of really good written proposals that then a large proportion of them sort of fail to get funding because they just look good on paper, and actually the team itself, or perhaps hasn't been as involved in the application process as they should have been, or perhaps the team hasn't got the strengths that they need to take it forward. But we do see quite a big at times a big gulf between what's written down on paper and what we see in person. And some of the key things, that, obviously I missed a bit of the chat, but some of the key things that I see as gaps within applications are, and Mike knows probably what I'm going to say, and in terms of regulatory pathways, rarely do I see a decent plan around how people intend to take a product to market, whether it's UK, EU, US, whatever it might be. That's a key gap, because if you don't understand that pathway, you don't understand the evidence requirements you need, you don't understand timelines, costs, all that sort of stuff. The other thing is, we see people dive into the technical basis and the scientific basis, and just tell us about the need first and foremost. And I really like seeing that PPIE, that engagement with patients, with users, with professionals. And again, it's a rarity. It's a rarity that we see it. So my tips would be, consider using grant writers or getting that expertise, especially if you're new to the process. But if I had to pick out two other areas to really focus on, those would be, really focus on, the demographic you're aiming at and get a sense of what the pathway looks like. You don't need a detailed plan, but you do need to, be able to define what, the intended purpose for your product is and that sort of stuff. Okay.
That's very useful as well. And I guess that brings us on to our final point around preparation to get that. If I move on to Joe and Andrew really on the equity side, seeing all these pitch decks, what are the factors that really stand out for you to help you to decide to go further? Is it traction, revenue, exposure, a clear exit strategy? We've touched on valuation. What works for you? Joe?
Shall I kick off? I think it's the most important thing is maybe showing that there really is a need for what you're doing, not to dive into the technical detail too much, but really show the need. And traction is important, but it comes in very different forms at different stages. So later on, it's people paying for whatever you're doing, your technology, and paying again and again. But earlier on, it's just giving feedback. It's trialing you. It's giving letters of support. So just at whatever stage you're at, making sure that you are fully engaged with the end users, that you know what they really need, not just what you think they need, and that you can evidence that through your pitch deck. And on, I guess, just sort of following back to the previous discussion, I guess, as a previous grant recipient, I think all of these things sort of work together in a way, and when you receive those grant funding applications, they can be really daunting, but actually it's such a good exercise of really learning to articulate what you're doing, and actually you can sort of recycle the same and iterate on it again and again, and actually the really good articulation of what you're doing and why that you've used your grant proposal, you can start feeding that information through your pitch deck as well.
Excellent. And Andrew?
Yeah, I guess first thing is traction tied into that timing piece. So making sure that there is, say, an MVP, something tangible, whether it's a service or a product, something in which these potential users may be able to tap into. I think this is a compelling piece, and that ties into that emotion side of crowdfunding. I guess also the market, as Joe mentioned, to make sure that it is something or that has the capacity to be able to have the potential, or it's a trending piece that people are reading in the newspapers, those that may not have an opportunity to invest into an early stage company, but then be able to access something that has the capacity to allocate a portion to this crowd. So marketing or that market is fundamental. Team, obviously, to be able to have a compelling group of people that are passionate about what they're building. On the campaign, you'd obviously shout to the sky in what they are, previous experience, whether they've exited before. All of these sort of points are quite crucial to be able to draw in that interest. And of course, tie in for my seeders hat on to have that pre-committed capital, to know that others are most compelled by your proposition, and then allow the crowd to be able to top up that amount.
Excellent. I think that's some great points there. And looking at the opposite side of things, since this seems to be an investment versus grants discussion, Mike L, what do you think are the key mistakes that people make when they put in grant funding applications that put you off reading?
Okay, first of all, I don't think it's a sort of grants versus equity funding at all. I think it's not an either or, it's an and, because you should be able to flow from one to the other. And, yes. And Jo's mentioned she likes to see some sort of validation from grant funding as well. That gives a little stamp on it. So I think you should be able to flow. What I think we touched on some of the things which make my eyes roll. We talked about the 2 men in a shed and being world leading with their product. The hyperboles as well. People who haven't thought about the competition, and they haven't mentioned competition in application either because of they don't understand the market, B, they're ignoring the market, or they just haven't looked hard enough and they've not seen where the competition is. Mike's touched on regs. People who haven't got a clear regs plan and also a clear reimbursement plan as well, they will fail. A lot of people think they've ticked the box when they go, oh, UK CE mark, CE mark, FDA, etc. But what they haven't considered as well is then who's actually going to pay them the first pound and how they're going to get paid for it. So what's the CMS reimbursement in the US? How are they going to get paid for products in France or through the reimbursement system there? So people who miss those out, they're the ones who are most likely to fail, and they're going to give you the eye rolls. And believe me, I can spot a paid for grant application in about 2 pages, and one of those will be the introduction page. And you know exactly what you're going to get at panel when you sit down and talk to the people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the combination, really, of the two, the blended approach that we said earlier. Michael, what are your thoughts? What are the common mistakes you think people make in all these funding applications that you see at Innovate UK?
So first, I just reinforce the point Mike made, that it's not an either or. It's definitely a sort of mutually beneficial system. And really, we're as I said, we're trying to meet a gap, an unmet need in that funding landscape. So for us, giving us a sense of how do you get to that inflection point where you can then go on and get investment, should you need to do so. Because fundamentally that's the gap that we're trying to fill. So being able, getting a clear plan in terms of where do you go after this is really important. I mean, I've mentioned some other points already. I'd absolutely agree about the reimbursement piece, especially for certain areas as well. Like if you're in diagnostics, depending on the diagnostics, it's just tough, especially if you need to if it requires some sort of change in service pathway. So one of the things I would suggest doing is trying to find some critical friends that will just pull it apart for you. We've got 1.3 million unique medical devices in the UK market at the moment, and after 2 years, only about 10, probably see about 10% of those still on the market after sort of 2-3 years. So it's really tough bringing these things to market, whatever that market is, and then getting them adopted. So, if you can find some critical friends that will help you think about the potential negatives and think through some of these aspects, I would strongly recommend doing that.
That's very interesting, and I'm gonna jump in with a question that's been put on the chat from one of our other speakers, now Clark from University Hospital Southampton. What proportion of medtech startups are thought to use crowdfunding after friends and family versus micro venture finance? Who wants to take that?
So could I just confirm what does he mean by micro finance?
I'm not sure.
But then I'll be able to dive into after the friends and family. So absolutely. So friends and family, they can prove to be a cornerstone as a sort of a chunk of investment that may be assigned or at least reflected on the platform, as long as it's been received in the company moments before the crowdfund, because these funds are all going to be used to be able to push forward to the milestones in which are outlined on the campaign. I guess it then ties into sort of the ways in which that is reflected and how much is needed to be reflected. And it is a very much case by case medtech, health tech. We do see that if it may be a B2B business, that a portion of the pre-committed capital needs to be a little bit higher than, say, a B2C company. And this is simply because that crowd may be a little bit lower. That network or that user base or community may not be as significant. But again, we definitely don't discriminate against those B2B businesses that are rather early on. And it's always great to be able to at least have that conversation, understand what it is that you're looking to do. Why is crowdfunding the way that you're going to go about it? Because crowdfunding really may not be the best way to be able to raise additional or top up additional equity. But at some point further down the track, it may definitely could. So it's, again, that timing piece. Working with the friends and family, understanding the terms at which they've come in at, what their experience is as well, to make sure that that valuation is realistic in which they've set, and then we work from that. So again, just a continual conversation. Always good to be engaged at the early stage, and then see whether it's the right time.
And I think he's put founders sub 10 million.
Okay. Well, I guess, yeah, it's that friends and family, working with those founders and looking to see whether we can actually reflect those funds on the campaign, and working with you on that.
Okay, great. I'm going to head to our last question now. So, Joe, what company structures put you off companies? What's the importance of an option pool for future hiring?
I guess first and foremost, we need to see a structure where the management team, those that are actually building and growing the business, are appropriately incentivized. Sometimes it's appropriate that maybe the initial inventor, somebody named on a patent, for example, has a portion of equity, but if they have a large portion and those that are actually running the business don't have enough, or maybe the university has a huge stake, or sometimes the venture builder takes a huge stake, somebody that's not actively participating in the business going forward, that can definitely be a concern. Yeah, that's probably primarily. I mean, maybe if a corporate sort of had a controlling stake, that would be a bit of an issue as well. But otherwise, we see businesses with all sorts of shareholders, but that's the primary one, the incentivization.
Okay. And a last question for Michael and Mike. How important is intellectual property in the valuation process, and what types of IP are mostly value or interest funders?
There's a lot of things out there which are not so much patents, but a lot around copyright, especially with the AI innovations out there as well. I mean, I was looking at Neil's question as well, touching on valuation. Valuation is probably the biggest question I get asked with my sort of professor of innovation in healthcare hat on. How do you get valuations? What contribution does IP form of it? I think on IP, if you're looking at IP, you like to see there's a plan. They've done some FTO. It probably becomes more important as you head towards Andrew and Joe's area a little bit. But if you're looking at the grant side, we'd like to see there's a plan for how you're going to do it, who you're going to talk to, and what you've considered. So you have an outline of it. I was just reading Neil's questions as we're going through it as well. I did see the other question for Neil. He put an open question there about education for venture founders. One of the things we're looking at NIHR is we're looking for something which helps academics, certainly people from the higher education institutes, understand more about how business works. So be more announcements about that in future.
Great. And Michael, to finish us off, I'm going to have to join in another roundtable in a second.
Yeah, just very quickly, because we're at a very early stage, really we're looking at IP from a freedom to operate perspective. So having that clarity that you have actually got that space in which to operate, and you're not going to be infringing on other people's patents, is really probably more of a focus for us, rather than the fact that you already have IP in place, because that would typically come as a result of some of the work we fund or further down the line.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for everybody's insights. We're now going to head over to the other roundtable, so I'll be in overcoming procurement challenges, and we hope some of our speakers stick around. If there's any, I know Nell's putting some questions. If anybody wants to answer those on the live chat, feel free to carry on. But thank you so much for your time. And if anybody wants to pitch in any of our events to funders, then you can go to superconnectseries.com and fill in the expression of interest form. Thanks very much, everybody. And if I don't speak to you beforehand, have a lovely Christmas and a Happy New Year.